You would never have guessed that what you're seeing would later become evidence of a crime committed in Gainesville. Just hours after appearing together, one of the two was reported missing, and 3 weeks later, his body was found in a shallow grave, showing signs of blunt force trauma to the neck, with his arms and legs bound by duct tape. What really happened? We invite you to watch the full video to find out. Christian Aguilar, an 18-year-old freshman at the University of Florida, had a promising future ahead of him. He had earned a scholarship to pursue biomedical engineering and quickly gained admiration from peers and faculty alike. Though quiet and reserved at first, those who knew him described a warm, witty young man who could brighten any room once he felt comfortable. While adjusting to life in Gainesville, Christian rekindled his connection with Erica Freeman, a childhood friend he had known since school. Their friendship soon evolved into a deep romantic relationship. According to his father, Carlos, Christian had never looked happier. Erica called him her soulmate, and they both envisioned a future together. Christian and Erica's bond strengthened quickly. They were genuinely happy together, something Erica hadn't felt in a long time. But that peace was short-lived. Just months into their new life, Pedro suddenly appeared in Gainesville. Pedro was also an old friend of both, a friend who was once very close. He had originally planned to attend Florida International University, several hours away, but abruptly transferred to Santa Fe. The timing wasn't lost on Erica. It soon became clear that Pedro hadn't come to Gainesville for academic reasons. He had come for her. Still fragile from the breakup, Pedro asked repeatedly if Erica and Christian were dating. Wanting to protect his emotional state, Erica lied, saying they were just friends. Pedro and Erica had started dating in high school during their sophomore year. At first, everything seemed normal, but as time passed, Erica grew uncomfortable with the relationship. When she tried to break things off, Pedro made ominous comments, warning her that things would never be the same if she left him. Intimidated and uncertain, she stayed longer than she wanted to. But eventually, as their college paths diverged, Erica found the courage to walk away. She enrolled at Santa Fe Community College in Gainesville, hoping for a fresh start. That's where she reconnected with Christian, and a new relationship quietly began. The 20th of September, 2012, began like any other day. Erica had just finished her classes and immediately messaged Christian to arrange their usual meetup. By this time, they were practically inseparable, spending nearly every day together. When he didn't reply, a rarity for him, Erica assumed he might be tied up with something. Hours passed, and she still hadn't heard a word. Concern began to grow into unease. Alone in her apartment, she kept trying to reach him but received no response. Her instincts told her something wasn't right, and that this wasn't just a case of a forgotten phone. Feeling increasingly unsettled, Erica walked to Christian's dorm to see if his roommate had seen him. There were no signs of him anywhere. As night turned into early morning, she continued to call and text with no success. At 4 a.m., out of desperation, she contacted Pedro Bravo, Christian's close friend from childhood. The two had been shopping the day before, but Pedro claimed they had gone separate ways in the afternoon and that he hadn't seen Christian since. This information only added to Erica's dread. By now, her anxiety had turned into outright panic. With no other options left, Erica made a call to Christian's father, Carlos, who was over 300 miles away in Miami. She hoped against hope that maybe Christian had somehow contacted his family. But Carlos had heard nothing, and he knew his son well enough to recognize that something was terribly wrong. Christian always kept in touch. He was never the type to vanish without a word. Without hesitation, Carlos and his wife Claudia packed up and started the long drive to Gainesville. Determined to find answers, what they were about to face would challenge everything they thought they knew about the people closest to their son. By the morning of the 21st of September, worry had turned into action. At around 10 a.m., Erica and Pedro walked into the University of Florida's police department to officially report Christian missing. The trio had a long history, having first met at Doral Academy during their high school years. While Christian and Pedro had been close friends, the dynamics between the three had shifted when Pedro and Erica began dating. That relationship, however, had ended shortly before college began. Though Pedro had taken the breakup hard, he eventually relocated to Gainesville as well, creating a seemingly cordial reunion of old friends. Yet beneath the surface, things were more complicated than they appeared. What Pedro didn't know was that Erica and Christian had started dating not long after. They had kept the relationship secret from him, believing he wasn't in an emotional place to handle the truth. As the hours passed and Christian remained unreachable, Erica confided in the officers that Christian had experienced episodes of depression in the past. This raised new concerns. Investigators considered whether he might have made an extreme decision or wandered off alone. Officers headed to his apartment, looking for clues, but the space was untouched. Nothing was missing, nothing was disturbed. It was as if Christian had simply vanished into thin air. Both Erica and Pedro were questioned separately. Erica recounted their concerns and how Christian had seemed fine just days before. Pedro, on the other hand, provided a more detailed narrative of the last time he had seen Christian. According to him, the two had left campus together in Pedro's car. They stopped for Christian to receive a flu shot, then drove to a nearby Best Buy where Christian purchased a CD. Afterward, they had a quick lunch. It all seemed casual, routine, nothing out of the ordinary. But as the officers pressed for more specifics, Pedro's account started to lose coherence. He mentioned small, irrelevant details, how his car sometimes damaged CDs, how they fumbled with the player for several minutes, and how Christian opened the CD, but didn't seem particularly interested in it. When asked if Christian had brought a backpack or left with any personal items, Pedro gave vague answers. He claimed that Christian had simply followed him out of the car, and that was the last he saw of him. But something didn't add up. The more they asked, the less consistent his story became, and investigators began to wonder if Pedro Bravo was hiding something far more troubling. According to Pedro, what had started as a casual outing between friends quickly turned tense. He told officers that he and Christian had gotten into a heated verbal disagreement while still inside his car. Emotions escalated, and Christian allegedly demanded to be let out. Pedro claimed he dropped him off on an unfamiliar street and then drove home alone. Hours later, plagued by guilt, he tried to call Christian but got no answer. The silence weighed heavily on him. He feared the worst, that his friend might be wandering lost, unable to find his way back to campus. Pedro recounted his internal struggle, unable to sleep as worry gnawed at him. Christian, he said, didn't have a good sense of direction and might have turned down the wrong street. His anxiety only grew when Christian's father, Carlos, called him directly, having just been informed by Erica. On the phone, Pedro admitted to the argument and the decision to leave Christian behind. He apologized, saying he hadn't meant any harm. He described himself as emotionally lost, going through a rough period, and claimed Christian had only been trying to help him. But now, he couldn't shake the fear that he'd made a terrible mistake. When pressed further, Pedro revealed another layer of uncertainty. He didn't even know the name of the street where he had left Christian. He had only recently moved to Gainesville and wasn't familiar with the area. He tried his best to describe the surroundings to officers, but his vague recollection wasn't particularly helpful. However, his description matched a section of town that was widely known to police, a rough neighborhood associated with crime and illicit activity. That detail shifted the mood of the investigation. Officers began to fear that Christian might have encountered danger there. Acting quickly, law enforcement reviewed surveillance footage from the Best Buy store Pedro had mentioned earlier. The video confirmed part of Pedro's story. Both he and Christian were indeed seen together there, just as he had described. The footage timestamp aligned with Pedro's timeline, showing the two walking side by side. But the reassurance didn't last long, because if Pedro had told the truth so far, it raised a chilling question. What had happened after Best Buy? And why was there no trace of Christian from that moment forward? Surveillance footage from Best Buy confirmed that on the 20th of September, around 3 p.m., Christian and Pedro were seen browsing aisles, sipping coffee, and chatting casually. There was no visible tension, just two young men appearing to enjoy each other's company. But after that point, Christian seemingly vanished from all footage. Investigators combed through hundreds of hours of surveillance from businesses, homes, and street cameras in the area Pedro had described. Not a single frame showed Christian. The trail ended cold after the store. Christian's family, along with police volunteers across Florida, ramped up their efforts, searching relentlessly for the missing student. One local camera did finally capture someone of interest, but it wasn't Christian. To everyone's surprise, the footage showed Pedro at a car wash, power washing his vehicle at 2 a.m. This raised immediate red flags. Pedro had told police he had driven straight home after dropping Christian off. The new evidence contradicted his timeline. When questioned, Pedro's story suddenly changed. He admitted that despite Christian and Erica's attempts to keep their relationship secret, he had recently discovered they were dating. This revelation deeply upset him and, he claimed, sparked a confrontation that spiraled out of control. Pedro told investigators that after finding out about the relationship, he confronted Christian in the car. Emotions flared and, according to Pedro, the situation escalated into a physical altercation. He confessed to striking Christian in the face, causing his nose to bleed profusely inside the vehicle. Pedro claimed he then forced Christian out of the car while he was nearly unconscious, abandoning him on the roadside. This version of events marked a drastic shift from his earlier account. On the 24th of September, based on inconsistencies and concern for Christian's welfare, Pedro was arrested for depriving a potential crime victim of medical attention. Detectives pressed Pedro further, sensing there was more to the story than he was willing to reveal. They told him plainly, Christian was not coming back. The timeline, the inconsistencies, and the forensic gaps all pointed towards something far more serious. They urged him to come clean, promising that his cooperation could help him, but also making it clear he wasn't going home that night. With each passing hour, the mystery surrounding Christian's disappearance deepened, and Pedro's shifting narrative only intensified suspicions. The question remained, was this just the beginning of an even darker truth? Despite countless hours spent reviewing surveillance footage, there remained a glaring void. Christian Aguilar was nowhere to be seen after the Best Buy visit. Yet one fact stood firm. Pedro Bravo was the last known person to have seen him alive. With blood discovered in Pedro's vehicle and the incriminating footage of him cleaning his car in the middle of the night, investigators turned their attention fully toward him. Seeking clarity, authorities obtained a warrant to search his apartment. What they uncovered there shifted the investigation from unsettling to deeply alarming. Among the items retrieved was a dated receipt, just days old, pointing to a suspicious shopping trip. Investigators followed the timestamp and confirmed through additional surveillance footage that Pedro had been captured on camera, purchasing several items: a shovel, duct tape, and sleeping pills. These weren't the kinds of purchases that could be easily explained away. Meanwhile, the search for Christian entered its 8th day. The campus community in Gainesville mobilized. Over 100 volunteers joined the effort to locate the missing freshman. His image appeared everywhere, but with no trace of him, despair started to settle in. The discoveries inside Pedro's apartment didn't end there. Christian's backpack, something he always carried, was also found tucked away in the apartment. It was the final confirmation investigators needed. Though Christian had yet to be found, the mounting physical evidence made it tragically clear. This was no longer a missing persons case. It had become a homicide investigation. Pedro Bravo was officially arrested and charged with Christian Aguilar's murder. Still, one haunting piece of the puzzle remained unsolved: the whereabouts of Christian's body. That answer came nearly 3 weeks later. In a remote area approximately 60 miles outside of Gainesville, a group of hunters stumbled upon a shallow grave. Forensic teams arrived swiftly, and using dental records, they confirmed what many had feared. The remains belonged to Christian Aguilar. An autopsy would later reveal signs of blunt force trauma to the neck, and that both his wrists and ankles had been bound tightly with duct tape. What had once been a quiet dispute between old friends had spiraled into a fatal betrayal, one that left a family shattered and a community in mourning. At this point, everything seemed clear. It all stemmed from an obsession that had long turned dangerous. Pedro had developed an intense and unhealthy obsession with his former girlfriend, Erica Freeman. After she ended their relationship, he refused to let go. Instead of moving on, Pedro spent months trying to rekindle their romance, unwilling to accept that her heart had shifted elsewhere. When he eventually discovered she was seeing someone new, he didn't just react with heartbreak. He began plotting. Right from the moment Christian and Erica began their private relationship, they were deeply worried. Pedro had frequently expressed dark thoughts after their split, including threats to make an extreme decision. Out of compassion and fear, they decided to keep their relationship hidden, hoping he would stabilize emotionally. What they didn't realize was that Pedro had already pieced everything together. He was fully aware of their romance. But instead of coping with the truth, he allowed his obsession to fester into rage. By the time they discovered how much he knew, it was already too late. Pedro had made up his mind that Christian needed to be erased from the picture. Among the most disturbing items discovered during the search of Pedro's apartment was a personal journal. Inside were pages consumed by obsessive thoughts, showing just how far he had mentally unraveled. Drawings, poems, song lyrics, and emotional letters to Erica filled the pages, alongside menacing lines directed at Christian. Some entries read like mantras, repeatedly stating his determination to win her back and get into Gainesville. It became clear that Pedro's obsession had spiraled beyond control, and the journal captured the descent in real time. One entry, dated July, revealed his growing paranoia. He admitted fearing Erica might end up with Christian, but tried to convince himself otherwise. He reassured himself that they were in separate colleges, had limited classes, and lived apart. Still, his thoughts circled endlessly around them. His obsession had taken over his life, overshadowing everything else. The growing fixation would soon lead him to act on the disturbing fantasies he had written down in secret. On the 20th of September, Pedro had reached out to Christian, asking if they could meet and go shopping. He claimed he needed someone to confide in about his emotional struggles. Though hesitant, Christian eventually agreed, believing a public meeting would be safe. They met in a Walmart parking lot, where Pedro had parked his car. There, Pedro had brought a drink laced with sleeping pills, and when Christian was vulnerable, he carried out the act he had been rehearsing in his mind for months. Pedro's phone data showed he remained in the parking lot for 2 hours that afternoon. Then, the phone went into airplane mode for 5 hours, during which he traveled to a remote, swampy area. Data logs from his device indicated his flashlight was activated 9 times, lasting a total of 48 minutes. On his return, he stopped at a fast food restaurant before heading to clean his car. Investigators later recovered soil from the vehicle's undercarriage, which matched the terrain where Christian had been found. The same was true for the shovel Pedro had purchased just days before the soil embedded on its blade told the final part of a story he had tried so hard to erase. In August 2014, nearly 2 years after Christian's body had been discovered, Pedro Bravo's trial officially began. Despite the evidence against him, Pedro pleaded not guilty. Among the witnesses was his former cellmate, Michelangelo, who took the stand with startling revelations. According to his testimony, Pedro had confessed that it took him 13 minutes to end Christian's life. Michelangelo said Pedro had also described multiple plans he had considered beforehand, some involving sleeping pills laced with chemicals, others involving far more violent methods. The details pointed to premeditation, not a spontaneous act. Michelangelo further revealed that Pedro had confided in him about where he had hidden the shovel used during the incident. Acting on this information, authorities located the tool beneath a wooden walkway near Pedro's apartment. Michelangelo also testified that Pedro admitted to panicking when a security vehicle passed by during the critical moment. The fear of being caught was so strong that Pedro allegedly kept one hand on the belt he had used, even while driving around afterward. The statements painted a chilling picture of someone deeply prepared, yet caught off guard by the reality of his actions. Pedro's legal defense, however, leaned on a familiar version of events that there had been an argument in the car, and that Christian had asked to be let out. Pedro claimed he complied and simply drove home. When asked about the duct tape found in his car, Pedro insisted it was there to cover a crack in his windshield. No confrontation had occurred, he said, and no violence had taken place in the vehicle. But this account stood in sharp contrast to both the physical evidence and Michelangelo's testimony. casting serious doubt on his credibility. During the proceedings, Erica also spoke about the emotional complexity of the situation. She explained that when Pedro asked if she and Christian were dating, she lied and said no. At that time, Pedro was very fragile and emotionally unstable, often speaking openly about making an extreme decision. Erica feared telling him the truth would push him over the edge. Her decision to conceal the relationship was made out of caution, not deceit. But despite her efforts to protect Pedro's emotional state, the storm had already been brewing beneath the surface, and no one had realized just how far he was willing to go. Pedro Bravo took the stand in his own defense. He was the only witness called by the defense during the 2-week trial. During his testimony, Pedro admitted to striking Christian in the nose while driving, claiming it was during a heated argument. According to him, Christian started bleeding, and Pedro pulled over into a small driveway surrounded by thin trees. He then said he fell asleep. Around 4 a.m., Pedro received a call from Erica, asking if he had heard from Christian. She explained that Christian had not returned to his dorm and that his roommate was worried. Pedro claimed he thought nothing of it at the time. One of the more talked about moments during the trial came when a screenshot allegedly showing the use of Apple's Hey Siri feature was presented. Initially, it was believed Pedro had used Siri to look up information related to the act he later carried out. However, Gainesville police and tech experts clarified that the image was actually viewed on Facebook, not through Pedro's phone. Furthermore, Pedro used an iPhone 4, a model without Siri capability. With that clarification, the screenshot was pulled from the courtroom and dismissed from consideration. The defense argued that while Pedro had been in a physical altercation with Christian, he did not cause his death. They claimed he simply left Christian on the side of the road and went home. As for the duct tape found in Pedro's car, the defense maintained it was used to patch a cracked windshield. The shovel, they said, had been purchased as part of a suicide plan. Pedro claimed he had planned to take his own life after the fight and intended to dig his own grave. Instead, he said he ingested a mixture of painkillers and pesticide, only to vomit it back up. Pedro interpreted this failed suicide attempt as a sign from a higher power that it wasn't his time. But despite his explanations and claims of remorse, the prosecution's case remained rock solid. Between the physical evidence, inconsistencies in Pedro's accounts, and testimony from his former cellmate, the narrative laid out by the defense failed to convince the jury. Pedro Bravo had tried to rewrite the story, but the facts told a different one, and the weight of that truth was quickly closing in. With DNA evidence, forensic findings, CCTV footage, journal entries, and a well-documented history of obsessive behavior, the case against Pedro Bravo was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours before delivering their verdict. Pedro was found guilty of first-degree felony murder. Additional charges included poisoning, false imprisonment, tampering with evidence, providing false information to authorities, and the improper transport of human remains. The sentence was clear and final: life in prison without the possibility of parole. While he never acted on earlier threats to end his own life, a suicide note was discovered in his cell by a prison guard. In that note, Pedro referred to himself as a monster for what he had done to Christian. Still, even with his cellmate's testimony and the weight of the verdict, Pedro continued to deny responsibility for Christian's death. At his sentencing, he told the court that only God knew the truth and insisted he had not harmed his friend. He accepted the punishment, but maintained his innocence. Throughout the trial, he repeatedly tried to reach out to the Aguilar family and to Erica. This behavior deeply disturbed Christian's father, Carlos, who pleaded with the judge to block any further contact from Pedro. The Aguilar family expressed relief at the outcome. Though the sentence couldn't bring Christian back, they found peace in the fact that justice had finally been served. Carlos spoke with quiet resolve, saying that while nothing could undo the loss, he had promised Christian at his burial that justice would be pursued, and now that promise had been fulfilled. The verdict was a recognition of the truth, and for the family, it marked a turning point in their journey through grief. Yet the emotional scars would remain, etched into their lives forever. Christian's funeral took place in Miami and was open to the public. The church was filled to capacity. Friends, family, and strangers came to honor a young man whose life had been filled with promise, kindness, and quiet brilliance. Erica Freeman spoke of him with heartfelt emotion, describing Christian as one of the kindest, most compassionate people she had ever known. She said that no words could ever fully capture who he was. You had to meet him to understand. In the end, Christian Aguilar left behind not only a lasting legacy, but also a heartbreaking reminder of how obsession and silence can destroy lives. What happened to Christian Aguilar is a haunting reminder of how unchecked obsession can lead to irreversible tragedy. A kind, brilliant young man lost his life at the hands of someone he once trusted. This case shows us the importance of recognizing red flags and protecting those we care about before it's too late. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell for more true crime stories. We cover real cases of betrayal, justice, and the hidden dangers behind seemingly ordinary lives.